Hello everyone and welcome to the new episode about editing with Darktable. In this episode we will talk a little bit about pastel color look in photography and what that means. You can see here in these examples. The main characteristic of pastel color look is that we have quite soft and muted colors, quite saturated colors on one side, and on the other side, as you can see, we don't have that much contrast. So the whole dynamic range is reduced practically to the, let's say, higher midtones and highlights. And so that way we have that quite gentle look in the photos. So let's see how can we achieve that kind of look in Darktable. Let's start with this photo of the flower. And first thing, as always, I would like to make some corrections, lens correction, maybe also denoising. And I think in this case, in this edge here, we have a quite high chromatic aberration, so let's correct that also. And I will suggest, if you can, if your lens is on the in the database, to try that to do that manually before you're using chromatic aberration module itself. So in this case, I think we can correct that manually. We'll go here to TCA override. And I think what we need to do is just to move the red channel a little bit to the left, and we're good. Okay. Now we can add some exposure. We need to brighten our photo a little bit. And to achieve that soft look, we also need to remove that contrast. So we can go to the sigmoid module. I'm using sigmoid in this case, but you can also do that in Filmic and reduce that contrast a little bit so that we have a bit more flat look. And now we can play with color balance RGB. So I will also use perceptual brilliance grading area to improve even more that contrasts. So first thing I would like to go with the shadows a bit higher. That means to lower the shadows, and maybe let me see. Maybe I can go also with highlights a bit higher, something like that. And I also can play with the masks here. So let's see what happens. I think I can also lower a little bit midtones so that we maintain the contrasts in that area, but don't go too deep at that contrast. So we need to increase the brightness of the shadows and the whole contrasts should be done in the midtones and the highlights. So let's play them with the masks even more. Let me see what will be good. I'm just trying to eyeballing the best setting here. I will say that should be enough for the first. Maybe we can readjust it later. And now I would like to play with the colors a little bit. So what I would like to achieve, I would like to tighten that whole range of the colors of the flower to achieve some kind of harmony. And we can use for that RGB primaries module. I would like, for example, to have that nice, let's say mint green without that much yellow. And we can use the green hue and move it on to the right. So we are practically, you can see here, we are moving into the middle of that harmony, split complementary. And the next thing what I would like to do, maybe also change the red hue a little bit. Let's say something like that. Now I would like to add red purity so that we get a bit more contrast in that area in the middle. And maybe, let me see, do we need to change something else? What about blue? No, we can leave the blue as it is. But what I could do, I can also use the tint purity, but I will use that with the next instance of the RGB primaries module, so that I have separation between dealing with each channel and that kind of overall look, or moving the whole tone of the photo with tint hue slider. And I would like to give, oh, not blue, excuse me, this one, tint hue, to give the whole photo a little bit of bluish look, so that we move practically that green or cyan into the blue area a little bit. That can also be achieved with color balance RGB, so we can go to the 4-ways tab and try to give the shadows a little bit blue, something like that. And now we have that blue in the shadows, but that looks quite oversaturated. We need, for that particular pastel look, we need less saturation. So we need also to go to the perceptual saturation grading and lower the saturation maybe in the shadows. And to compensate that, I will go with the saturation just a tiny bit more in the highlights. Let me see what happens if I add some brilliance. No, I think we should go with the brilliance also down, so that those pixels that are not that much saturated don't have that saturation, so we can lower it there. But I can add it in, maybe in the midtones a bit. Let me see. That's now the eyeballing of that mid area. Yeah, that looks much better. Let me see. Yeah, I don't think that we need to do much more. I think we could add a bit more purity in the midtones, excuse me, in the mid part of the flower. But let me try something else. I will use now color balance RGB second instance, because I would like to change just tiny bit the color of that darker reds. Let me try that. So let me mask that area real quick. Let's say something like that, or maybe this. Yeah. We will also add some feathering and maybe tighten it, because I just want the slight change, so that we don't have that, that we have a bit difference between those colors in the darker areas and in the lighter areas. And now I can change the hue of that area just a bit. Let's say there. Hope you can see the difference. Not that much, really quite a fine, gentle touch, so that we have a bit more variety in that area, color-wise. And I don't know, maybe we can add some saturation there, just to increase the contrast in that area. Yeah, that looks quite nice. And now we need to deal with local contrast of the photo. The first thing what I would like to do, I will use contrast equalizer to soften the photo overall. Something like that. So that we don't have that quite coarse contrast. Let me go back to the waveform. And in the next instance, I will use now diffuse and sharpen above contrast equalizer. And to increase the local contrast a little bit in high frequency area. Now with the contrast equalizer, we have lowered that contrast in the coarse part of the photo, and now we can add it back, but only in high frequency. So we can use some kind of preset. Let's say we can try to use dehaze and see the difference. Maybe you can lower the edge sensitivity just a tiny bit. I want to increase the shadows. I just want to increase that contrast there. Yeah, you see, we have now a bit more contrasts, or a bit more local contrasts, let's say. Maybe I could reduce that only the midtones. Let me see. Yeah. Practically, I'm adding a bit more sharpness in this area, but not that much. I don't want to change that contrast, or overall contrast of the photo. And what else we can do? We can also play a little bit with sigmoid module. Now, if we want much more contrast in the highlights and midtones and not in the shadows, so we can use now the skew option here. Go to the right, and as you can see, we have immediately much more contrast in the highlights. Maybe we can go a bit lower with overall contrast and add even more skew. Another thing what you can do is to lower the target white so that we're not on the 100% white, but let's say somewhere 95 or whatever, so that we get that nice gentle analog look. Okay, do we need more? And what I also can do, let me try that. I would like to brighten a little bit the greens and darken even more the reds by using color calibration next instance. So let's do that. So let's brighten a bit the greens and go down a bit with the reds. First thing. And the second thing is I would also try to reduce the colorfulness of the greens. We don't need that much saturation there. And compensate that by adding a bit more colorfulness in the reds, because that is the most important part of the flower. Okay. So let's see before and after. Let's start with the lens correction, snapshot, and go back. Yeah. As you can see, we have a relative bright look of the photo. It's a bit softer than those contrasts that we have here. And of course, we could try to add a bit more diffusion, but I think for this case we are good as it looks now. Okay, next example. Okay, this will be our next photo, and as always, lens correction and denoising first, and with exposure, so that we have that high key look. And in this case, we can try another option that we can use to tighten that dynamic range. Instead of using contrast in sigmoid or lowering contrast in sigmoid, we can also use tone equalizer. For that, for example, we can use some presets like compressed shadows and highlights, or I'm using my own. I call it linear invert, and it looks like that, just like that. And now I need to adjust exposure a bit better. So we want to go quite high here, and also need to adjust mask exposure compensation accordingly. So let's say about there, or a bit lower. Maybe that was too much. So let's lower everything, something like that. And now we have that high key look. And we need to deal with the colors now. First, I will go to the color balance RGB to increase the saturation so that I can be able to see what kind of colors we are dealing with. And as you can see, we have some yellowish touch. We don't want that. So we can use also, as a last example, RGB primaries to correct that. For example, we can also go with the green hue a bit in the right direction, maybe red hue down to the magenta. So let me see how that looks like, in the vectorscope. And we can also go with the blue towards cyan, something like that. Let me see. Yeah, it looks much better now. So we have that pastel colors. And I would also like to separate a little bit the colors. On one side we have that orangey, magentish area here with the skin tones and sand. And we want to have a bit colder sky. And also this area here. So in that case, I can use RGB primaries, a new instance, and I can tint the whole tonal range of the photo by using tint hue. So let me increase tint purity first so that you can see what I mean. As you can see now, we have the whole photo has that orangey reddish look, and I can change that by moving tint hue towards something like that here, blue. Yeah, that looks nice. That looks much better. As you can see, we have now a bit more bluish look. And what also I would like to do, I could darken a little bit that bluish part and brighten the skin tones just by using color calibration next instance and go to the brightness tab. And now I will lower the brightness of the blue channel. As you can see now, we can see those things in horizon, sea and something. And I will compensate that by adding the brightness in the red channel so that we have something like that. In terms of colors, I think we are good now, but I need to play a little bit more with saturation. I think we can go and add a bit more vibrance. We don't want to have quite saturated photos. That is quite important to have that muted colors, but we need a bit more saturation because we need that difference between those different areas, which can be done with the colors. And let me see, what can we do more? I think we can play also with purity sliders. For example, we can add a bit more purity to the red with RGB primaries and lower the purity in the blue. We don't want to have that much blue. We just want that indication of the sky and of the sea, something like that. In terms of contrast now in that area, we can use, let me go to back to the waveform. We can use also colors balance RGB, the brilliance sliders to improve a little bit the contrasts in the photo. So maybe I can go up with the midtones and also with the highlights a little bit. Maybe something like that. And I will also try to play with masks and see what happens if I move mid-gray fulcrum, for example, and also a little bit highlights fell off. So now we have a nice contrast in that area. And we can also use sigmoid, of course, and try to get, let me see what happens if I go back a little bit back with the contrast here, but add some skew, because I want in the highlights and highest midtones a bit more contrast. And with the skew slider, we can achieve that. And now we have that too much saturation because of that, and we can go back to the color balance RGB, to the master tab, and lower the saturation there. Maybe even the highlights. Go down a little bit with the highlights. So we don't want too much saturation, something like that. So the next step will be to flatten even more the photo, but not our main subject. So first thing what we will do is we will use contrast equalizer for softening of the photo overall, something like that. And now we have nice softening around our main subject, the woman. But I don't want to lose too much details on the skin and on that skirt. So now I could mask the whole area, but I would like to add a high frequency contrasts only on that area. So I will use diffuse and sharpen and go above contrast equalizer, and also use something like dehaze. Maybe the lower a little bit of edge sensitivity, then we have a bit more contrasts, local contrasts there. And now I will add the mask only around the woman. Approximately. It doesn't need to be too precise because you won't see that much difference. Maybe add some feathering, let me see. Bit feathering radius, go down. That's okay. And now you can see we have that nice soft look overall, but our main subject, the woman, looks good. So we have enough details there. And I think we're done. The nice thing with RGB primaries and that tint hue is that you can now have different styles. You can move now that hue and have warmer version or colder version, depends on what you like. But I will leave it there in this area here. And I think we have now nice pastel look with muted colors and so nice high key brightness. So let me see before and after. Tone equalizer, or where would we start? Let me start with lens correction, snapshot, and compare before and after. And you can see we have quite nice pastel looking photo here. Okay, next example. For this example here, we will need to change the contrast in sigmoid and also use tone equalizer because we have here quite high dynamic range. So let's do that. But first, as always, a lens correction, denoising, and maybe in this case I can also correct the geometry with a rotate and perspective module, something like that. And now we can go to sigmoid and lower the contrasts and go to the exposure and go a bit higher with exposure, let's say something like that. And I will also use tone equalizer to get the dynamic range even tighter. Let's use again linear invert, readjust the mask compensation, and we have something like that. It looks now quite flat, but we will correct that with color balance RGB. We will add a bit more brightness here, and maybe in midtones the shadows a little bit down, and overall brightness something like that. We can also play with masks, so let's see what we get if we move those sliders. I will say we're good here. And now I need to add a bit more saturation to be able to see what we have with the colors. And I think we will need to have a bit more blue in the sky. So similar to the last example, I will darken the blue with next instance of color calibration. And brighten a bit the reds so that we have a bit more blue in the sky. And now we have that flat look, but we need to improve a few things. First, we need to improve the colors. So we will also use RGB primaries. I would like to have a bit more cyanish sky. And I think we need to add some purity here in the reds. By the way, we can also use color calibration and color furnace tab to add some more intensity in the reds and less intensity in the blue, for example, like that. And now we can play with contrasts a bit more. Now we can use sigmoid. Maybe add a tiny bit more contrast here, and also go in this direction with the skew, because we need that contrast in the highlights. And I will also like to lower a little bit target white so that we don't go to the 100%, maybe to 90-95%, something like that. And because we have one scene that has a lot of details, and I want to soften them that much, this time I don't want to use contrast equalizer to soften the photo, but in contrary, I will use now diffuse and sharpen only for adding that contrast in high frequency, contrast on the edges. And we can also use, for example, the haze with a simple procedure, and maybe go with edge sensitivity down so that we have that contrast higher. But we don't want to have those spikes in the shadows, so we need also to adjust the mask so that the deepest shadows are not influenced with this procedure. Let's say something like that. Let me go a bit zoom in so that you can recognize we have now a bit more finer local contrast, as you can see. That is what I would like to achieve, that's all. And I think we are good. We have a quite nice flat look, so we don't have deep shadows. The difference between the deepest shadows and the highlights are not that big. You can also recognize that in this area. Maybe what I could do, I could also play with a little bit with tint hue. So let me see what happens if I move the tint purity. Yeah, we can give this scene some kind of the warmer look. So let's go about there maybe. Let me crank that up just to be able to recognize in which direction that goes. And I'll move the slider up and down until I'm satisfied with the colorization. I will say somewhere here, but not that much, just a touch. Yeah, that's cool. Okay. And now I think we also need to regulate a little bit saturation. I don't want that much saturation in the highlights, for example. And maybe also in the midtones. Let me see. Maybe go with the vibrant. What will happen? No. Go with vibrance, bit more higher. And I will say we are good. Now we have that that kind of pastel look. A bit lower, excuse me, a bit lower saturation. I can play for hours now to readjust it, but I think it's good enough for our purpose. So let's say before and after. We can start with rotational perspective. Take a snapshot and compare. Yeah, we see clearly every detail in the photo, but we don't have that difference between the shadows and highlights. So we have quite tight dynamic range and give us that high key look that we want to have. Yeah, it looks nice. Okay. The nice thing in the Darktable is that you can apply your edit to other photos. You can make your own style. In this case, I would like to demonstrate you how can you transfer that edit into the other photos. So if I click on that last edit, and I will want to apply it to the similar scene here, this one, I just can go to use selective copy, because if you use selective copy, you can also choose which kind of modules you want to apply to the next photo. For example, we don't want rotation and perspective to apply the same rotation values for a rotation and perspective to be applied to the new photo, so we need to disable it. Where do we have it? Here. And the rest we can apply. Okay, so now okay, and now when I choose that next photo, selective paste, and I press OK, and now we have the same look for this one. Maybe we need to readjust the things a little bit. Maybe we can go with exposure just a bit down, readjust tone equalizer a bit more, and I don't know, we can play with other values, and I think I don't want to have here that much purity. Don't want to change the whites that much, and I don't know, we can go a bit higher here, and so on. So we can readjust that. Also the lens correction I need to apply, and maybe I can also apply rotation or perspective. Just that doesn't look good. Let me try that. Yeah. Something like here, like that here. And we have a next photo also done with this. We can now also play with RGB primaries. For example, I would like to test how it looks if I use some other tint, something like that. Let me try this one. And we can also, for colorization, you can also use 4-way steps. For example, maybe I would like to have the shadows a bit more reddish, for example, like this. And I don't know, midtones or the highlights a bit bluish, and so on. You can really achieve some special style that you can always use or play around. Let me try a bit more. Maybe a bit less saturation. Overall saturation can go down, and so on. So you can create practically your own style. Maybe not to the highlights, but to the midtones. Let me try. Fine, yes, something like that. Okay. A bit more contrast, maybe. Yeah. So the next example. In this last example, for this episode, the main motives are this ship and the harbor. And that nice pastel look can help us to isolate those two subjects a bit better. So as always, we'll start with lens correction and denoising. And we can also use sigmoid for lowering the contrast, parallel with tone equalizer. But first we need to go higher with the exposure, so let's say about there. And then we can use tone equalizer also for reducing that dynamic range, something like that. Maybe I can also add a bit more edge refinement so that we have a little bit flatter photo. Now we can go with the color balance RGB and enhance the contrast in the highlights and midtones, maybe something like that. And as you can see, we have now better isolated those two areas, but we are not finished yet. We can also play a little bit with mask. Let me see what we get if I move those things here a little bit. Not that much. And now I will like to isolate those two parts even more. So first thing what I would like to do, we don't need to have any details here in the sky or in other areas. So we can use contrast equalizer to soften the photo overall, let's say something like that. But we don't want to add that fogginess, that mist. So what we need to do, we can use now one blend mode, darken, and now we are influencing more or less only the highlights. So you can see the difference. Maybe we can go even deeper here so that we have more or less a flatter, a low contrast highlights or low local contrast in the highlights, something like that. And we want to increase the local contrast on those both areas at the same time. So we can use diffuse and sharpen module, move it above contrast equalizer and apply something like the haze. Same thing that we have done in the examples before. Go with the edge sensitivity down to have that contrast even higher. But I want to reduce that only to those two motifs. So let's use some drone mask for that. You don't need to be too precise. And also what I need to do is, I don't want to influence the darkest area too much. Let's say something like that. I hope you can recognize the difference. Something like that. And now we have a nice isolation of those two areas without too much distraction of others. And we can now play with colors. This time I will also use RGB primaries a little bit. Use the red hue to shift the reds into the magenta and maybe greens to the cyan and also the blue to the cyan, so that we have some, let me see what we have, some kind of triad. And what I would also like to do, I can use color balance HEB, the 4-ways tab, to give the shadows a little bit more warmth. So we can now go to the hue slider in the shadows. So that way we can get some nice analog look. As you can see now, we have those darker areas, a bit more colorized. Maybe we can also play a bit with saturation. Let me see. We don't want to have that much saturation, so we will increase it a bit in the shadows and maybe a little bit in the midtones, but remove it from the highlights. And now, what I would also like to do, I will like to increase that analog look. But before I do that, we can also increase a bit more the contrasts in the highlights. So as in the last example, we can go a bit higher here with a screw. Let's say there, something like that. And lower the overall contrast in sigmoid. And now I can use RGB primaries again, new instance, because I would like now to shift the white point of the whole image. And to be able to do that, I need to go with the RGB primaries above sigmoid. And now I can use tint hue, and you can see what happens if I change the coloration of the photo. If I go somewhere like here, now everything gets that maybe you can recognize, everything gets shifted into the direction of the blue. That is what I would like to achieve, and I can now experiment what kind of colorization could be good for this scene. For example, this one is already nice, but I can move the hue slider and see, is there any other area? For example, this one is also nice. In this one we have that warm look, a warm, nice, warm analog look, but I would like to go back. I like more this one because we have that red areas in the ship and also in the harbor, and we have then nice contrast in the colors also because other areas are more bluish, something like that. Let's play a bit more with sigmoid, just a tiny bit, see what we had, because I would like to isolate even more those two areas here. We don't need that much details in other areas, and maybe I can also lower the white point just a tiny bit so that we don't touch that much the 100% area. Yeah, as you can see now we have nice colorization of the photo. Let me increase even more contrast here, just to be able to isolate the subjects even better. Okay, that looks nice. Now let's see before and after. So we can start with lens correction, add some snapshot, activate it and go to the last step, and you can see we have now those two areas, the ship and the harbor, clean and separated from the environment. So that way you can play with colors and also with brightness, and to achieve some kind of a soft and moody look in your photos. So that will be all for this episode, and as you have seen, you can use that pastel style, or pastel look, to give your photos some kind of gentle and airy style or feel, and also that can help you to isolate your main subject better. And if you have some questions, please be free to ask in the comment section or go to the pixel.us discussion forum and ask your questions there. So thank you for watching, and until the next time.